Book, Keefe D mentions how Boss Man asked Keefe D to help move 300 kilos of quote-unquote unknown substance to help start up this record company called Deathrow. Keefe D, with his crew, moved the product and delivered the money to where it needed to go, which we can assume was Suge Knight. Now, there's no way to confirm 100% that this is true, that this was the money that actually got everything started, or if it was perhaps just a contribution. But my best guess is that Suge used everything combined, from Harry O to Vanilla Ice to Boss Man. The rise and fall of Deathrow Records.
Deathrow is going on here tonight. The new explosion of the most powerful record label to come out into the market that I've ever seen in my life. And I mean that. Deathrow. 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 That's what's happening tonight.
1992. By 1992, Deathrow Records was up and running. In that year alone, they signed multiple artists such as Daz Dillinger, Nate Dogg, Corrupt, and Snoop Doggy Dogg. At the time, Snoop Dogg was Dr. Dre's protege. How Dr. Dre found out that Snoop Dogg can rap was at a bachelor party through Warren G, Dre's stepbrother, though he had known of Snoop Dogg prior as a street kid.
My baby bro, Warren G,
yes, sir.
He actually brought me the a cassette tape. And we were at a bachelor party, and I popped it in and listened to it like, whoa, I need to meet him. I need to meet him. And what it was the way he said his words and his voice. You know, I really like working with artists that have interesting voices. If you notice, most of the artists I've worked with, you'll know their voice as soon as you hear them.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So that was one of the things that really turned me on.
At the time, Deathrow Records was in charge of creating the soundtrack for the 1992 movie Deep Cover, which featured the single Deep Cover with Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. And soon they would work on Dre's debut album, and one of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time, by the way, The Chronic. The first single, Nothing But a G Thing, dropped in November of 1992, peaking at number 2 on the Billboard Top 100 and number 1 on the Hot R&B/hip-hop singles and tracks. The single sold over 1 million copies in just a few months and was certified platinum. However, in this time and amidst the early success of Deathrow, it wouldn't be too long until Suge once again did what Suge did best, and that was allegedly threaten people. Stanley Brothers incident. In the Deathrow Records headquarters, it has been said that Suge Knight had a phone that no one was allowed to touch except him. It was the Harry O line, let's call it, and it was strictly for that use in the case that Harry O calls or he were to make the call to Harry O. Well, one day Suge Knight comes into the studio and finds one of the Stanley brothers, Linwood Stanley, on that phone. At the time, both George and Linwood Stanley, both rappers, were there to see Dr. Dre. Now, Suge told Linwood to get off the phone, and he resisted. Both brothers basically said, F you, you're not Dre, saying in so many words like, hey man, you can't tell us what to do. Clearly, they had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were very soon about to find out. So Suge leaves, then comes back moments later with a gun and points it to their heads, and tells them to get on their knees, ordering both of them to take off their clothes. They once again resist, so he fires the gun by one of their ears. He then proceeds to pistol whip Linwood Stanley, grabs their wallets, taking out their IDs, and lets them know that if the police finds out about what just happened, he will indeed find their families and will make do with them how he sees fit. You guys can obviously read between those lines, but of course they ran out the building, and what was the first thing that they did? Tell the police exactly what happened. This was the beginning of the end for Suge Knight in terms of his legal troubles, and as we saw the success of Deathrow, we saw the many pitfalls over the years interwoven with the capital success when it came to the artists of Deathrow and Suge Knight himself, leading to the eventual decline. Prior to the release of The Chronic, Suge was shopping around the album for distribution. Originally, the album was to be released through Sony, but due to the quote-unquote crazy things going on around Deathrow and Dr. Dre's sticky contract situation with Ruthless Records, it was a no-no, and they kept shopping around to different distributors and would be faced with the same fate every time, as no one wanted anything to do with them due to their contractual problems with Ruthless, until they went to Interscope Records and had Jimmy Iovine hear the album. Now, Jimmy Iovine loved the record and really wanted to work with Dr. Dre, so it was on. Jimmy Iovine helped legally finalize Dr. Dre's contractual release from Ruthless, and the album was to be distributed by Interscope Records. Now, one thing that we have to absolutely give Sugeknight credit for is setting the terms of the agreement, which was that they, as Deathrow, would keep the masters, otherwise known as the master recording, as he understood, like Dr. Dre's previous situation, that they were not going to settle for them doing all of the work and them taking the money. And because Jimmy Iovine desperately believed in Dr. Dre and his talent, he had no choice but to agree. 1993. By 1993, The Chronic was a major success, and now Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre were gearing up for the release of Snoop Dogg's debut album, Doggy Style, which would drop on November 23rd. The album was a major success and outperformed The Chronic, eventually going quadruple platinum. Snoop Dogg case. August 25th, 1993, amidst the creation of Doggy Style, Snoop Dogg and his bodyguard Malik were involved in a deadly shooting of an alleged rival gang member named Philip Waldemariam. The story was that they had gotten into a verbal dispute while Snoop Dogg was riding around with his bodyguard in a Jeep. It appeared to be some rivalry taunting, and the exchange started to escalate on Waldemariam's end, where he brought out his weapon aiming to fire it towards them, and Malik quickly reacted in self-defense and shot him before he can shoot them. Waldemariam ended up passing due to the injuries he sustained. Now, Snoop wanted to turn himself in right away because he thought that it was the right thing to do. He knew he was innocent and wanted to clear the air on how the situation went down. And I mean, of course, the longer you wait to turn yourself in on something like this, the guiltier you appear. Snoop let the label know what happened, but Suge advised that he stayed low for a couple of days because within a week he had the MTV Music Awards to promote the upcoming album, Doggy Style. Now, in Suge's mind, at the end of the day, Snoop had a job to do and had to be the artist first and promote his upcoming work. So they took a risk and he went to the awards. Now, obviously getting there, the police were posted up and ready to take this man to jail, but they agreed to make this as graceful as possible. Snoop would go on stage to present the award and exit stage left quietly to be taken under custody. And that's exactly what they did. Arrested with both his bodyguard and an associate by the name of Sean Smith. Snoop would soon be released one day after posting $1 million bail, courtesy of Suge Knight. Now, this arrest in many ways was disheartening and distressing for Snoop, because at the time he thought about making it out of the hood just to have the possibility of everything that he worked for stripped away in an instant. That thought in itself was very difficult to bear, a story that by now we are very familiar with. Luckily, by 1996, both him and his bodyguard were acquitted on all charges. 1995. By 1995, Deathrow Records was on top of the globe despite the increasing criticism of gangster rap music by the mainstream media, politicians, and academics. Deathrow had multi-platinum releases of albums like The Chronic, Doggy Style, and the duo Dog Food releasing the Dog Pound under the belt. And by this time, they have shaped the sound of West Coast rap and solidified themselves as the biggest and most successful label in the West Coast. Unfortunately, however, for every success came with its equivalent pitfall. Tupac Shakur. The major success in this case was getting into business with Tupac. Tupac signed to Interscope Records back in 1991 and had already released 3 albums with the label prior to any contact with Deathrow Records. By 1995, Tupac was serving time at the Compton Correctional Facility, and I'm not going to go too deeply on the case, but he was serving time on sexual abuse charges due to an incident with then at the time 19-year-old Ayanna Johnson. He was, however, acquitted on all other charges. According to Wikipedia, quote, by October 1995, pending judicial appeal, Shakur was incarcerated in New York. On October 12, he bonded out of maximum security Dannemora Clinton Correctional Facility in a process of appealing his conviction. One Suge Knight, CEO of Deathrow Records, arranged for posting of his $1.4 million bond, end quote. At this time, Tupac was in financial ruin.